there. I'm recording in YouTube, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
So here with us, it's Ben, who has been visiting us for 3 years now, I think, virtually. We are really hoping that, there. That at some point we'll be able to receive you here in the Fulbright Commission or in ICANA here in person. But meanwhile, we have you here on Zoom. So Ben Gutierrez is Assistant Director of Admissions, right, in Johns Hopkins University, and he's here to tell you a little bit about your very much wanted task of writing the essay, right?
No, buenos dias. Good to see you all. Thank you for having me. So I'm an assistant director of admissions at Johns Hopkins University, and I will be talking about the essays today, but I'll do it from the perspective of just someone who works in a highly selective institution in the United States. So I'm not going to just give examples or information that is helpful for applying to Hopkins. I hope this information is general enough to help you all navigate the essay writing process and how to think about essays for a host of different universities that exist in the United States. Again, I'm mostly coming at it from the perspective of a highly selective institution. So if you are interested in any of those schools or institutions, then this information can be very helpful for you all. I know at this point you've probably talked a little bit about the Common Application and the different application platforms, generally have potentially done some research on different universities and how to find universities in the United States. But as you start thinking about the application, for many of those of you who are applying for this upcoming cycle this fall or in the next couple of months, then this can be really helpful information as you prepare to apply. So I wanted to start first by saying that this will be interactive as well. So there are parts where I'll actually ask folks in the audience to contribute and provide feedback or thoughts on certain essay excerpts for both the personal statement and the supplemental essay. So we do want to have participation, and I didn't want to just talk to you all. I wanted to bring you all into the fold and the mix. So I wanted to also open with that. Overall, I'll give just kind of a general overview here. This isn't going to last the full hour. I'll leave some time at the end for some questions as well. So I do want to also make you all aware of that at the beginning. So at this point, you may have at least heard of the term holistic admissions. It's a practice that many selective universities in the United States practice. A common question that we get from students around the world is, for these selective and highly selective institutions, how are you making the decision among the hundreds and thousands of applications that are coming to your university, to Hopkins? And the reality is, at the very beginning, we are very much focused on the academics. So we do want to understand, how you're doing in your secondary school environment, whatever that looks like. So we have generally across all of our universities, admissions representatives like myself who really work to understand the schools, the types of curriculum, the types of curriculum at your school, in your region, in Argentina, whatever that looks like. We work to understand what that is, and we really only evaluate your academic performance within the context of the school and the region that you are coming from. So for Hopkins, we don't recalculate GPAs. We don't try to compare a student from country A to a student from country B, or a student who's on the AP curriculum versus a student who's on the national curriculum. We don't get into that kind of comparison because we are ultimately looking to see how are you performing within what has been available to you at your school within your region. Certainly, if you have any questions around that academic review, I can certainly talk about that at the very end if you do have questions. But really, the holistic admissions review also includes pieces like those more qualitative components, those storytelling elements. And while we will be focusing on the essays today, there are other places in the application where we work to understand how is the student exhibiting things like that academic curiosity or that desire to engage with their community. Those areas, things like the letters of recommendation from your teachers, from your advisors, if you want to ask advisors at Education USA to recommend and advise you on your behalf. Typically, these are other ways to understand more about a student. The extracurricular activities as well. There are places in the application, which I'm sure you will go through a few kind of trainings or boot camps and workshops on what filling out the extracurricular list looks like. You may even have other representatives from schools like I'm doing today to come talk about that. But we're also interested in what you're doing when you're not sleeping, eating, studying. What are some causes that you have dedicated yourself to during the pandemic? Are there any hobbies that you've picked up or developed or learned? And so we want to understand, how are you using your time outside of the classroom? What are those interests beyond just the classes that you're taking and the grades that you're getting? The essays, as I mentioned, we'll spend the majority of time today talking about that. And then depending on the university, there may be some additional components that universities may consider in addition to the 4 that I've noted. Some universities will request interviews, so that might be an additional way for you to get to know a university, but for them to get to know you. Some interviews may be led by admissions officers. Some universities will have alumni who do interviews. At Hopkins, we don't offer nor require interviews as a part of our process, but it is a good question to ask when you are reaching out to schools that you are interested in. Do you require an interview? How do I access that? Are some really good questions to ask. Testing, so that's another piece to know if you're applying to a university. Many universities in the US are moving to test optional. So Hopkins is included in that number, where essentially you can apply without having to submit testing. So we know that testing availability is pretty dicey. It's hard to come by test offerings, whether it's ACT or SAT. So you can apply without any testing and we will still consider your application. We are really more focused on the 4 elements that I talked about at the very beginning, including the essays. Things like English language proficiency exams as well. For some universities, those might be required. For Hopkins, they are recommended if you haven't attended an English speaking or gone to an English speaking curriculum school for 2 or more years. Again, it's not required if it's not available, but it is just another thing that you can put on your application to indicate that you are proficient in English. And then other components, music portfolios, research portfolios. Some universities may require these. For us at Hopkins, we do not. We encourage students, if they want to send us something, feel free to do so, but different universities may have different other requirements depending on the type of school that they are. So the first 4 are pretty general, what you'll find, but the last bullet really catches a lot of the other additional things to potentially ask questions about. But the essays. So I know that the essays are something that can be pretty daunting. We know that if you're in the early stages of thinking about the essay, you're probably looking at, our Essays That Work page at Hopkins. You're probably looking at a lot of resources. You've already begun asking the Education USA Advising Center for tips on how to craft that. But what I want to do is really just sort of talk very high level about what the essay should be, and the 2 different types of essays that I'll talk about. I'll talk about the difference between those 2, and also why we use the essays or what we use the essays for. What are we ultimately looking to understand? I can say now that we're not looking to see necessarily that the student has achieved a level that is at the national or international level of academic performance, or that they have changed the world. That is not the goal of the essay. The essay is not to determine who has achieved all of these crazy, almost unattainable things. The goal of the essay is really for us to understand a little bit more that hasn't been mentioned anywhere else in the application. So if you are looking at the extracurricular list, if you're looking at your academic record, if you're looking at other parts of your application, and if there are components about you as an individual that you feel like haven't been mentioned or indicated anywhere else, then the essay is a good place where you can add that information to complement any of the information or context that your application has presented up until that point. We as admissions officers, we see these essays along with all of the pieces of the application in one sitting. So when you're thinking about the application, think about it almost in that way. So the application is going to be in front of the admissions officer. Each piece should add some new context or some new nuance to the story that I'm trying to tell in the application to the university. So that first bullet sort of gets to that point. The essay should really complement a lot of the information that is provided elsewhere. The second bullet I realize is pretty vague, but really what we encourage students to do is to feel free to use your own writing style. These don't need to be academic papers. They don't need to follow a 5-paragraph format where you have a thesis and body paragraphs that are supporting that thesis. Really feel free to use the first person. Feel free to tell us a story with dialogue. Feel free to hone in on a specific moment in your life, a specific interaction with an individual, a family member, a friend. Those really personal moments in time that you tell us about in that way can really reveal a student's personality, can really be a great way to present a certain part of your personal quality or your characteristics or your story. And I'll go into some examples of what I mean in a moment. And then lastly, why we look at the essays is because we're ultimately in other places getting a sense of your academic credentials. In your academic record, we'll see, have you done well in the courses that you've taken? In the extracurriculars, we're looking to see, how have you used up your time outside of the classroom in terms of the activities and the interests that you've been involved in? But the essays can really add that next layer, which is, are you going to be a kind roommate? Are you going to be interested in getting involved in the city or the community surrounding campus or on campus? Are you going to be someone who collaborates with others, on research projects or just generally outside of the classroom? So we're really looking to understand, ultimately, are you going to be a community member beyond a student? So those kind of characteristics of being open-minded, being a good friend, being someone who is welcome to new opinions or wants to share their own perspectives and opinions. Those are things that the essays can really help a student. Put that information forward. In terms of essays, there are 2 different types. I realize there are 3 bullets here, but the second bullet around supplemental essays really kind of addresses the 2 types of supplemental essays that you might encounter. So the main type of essay that you'll probably already, it's probably the first one you'll start working on, is the personal statement. So that statement or essay is the one that is located on the Common Application or any university-specific application that you are applying through. Typically, this personal statement is going to ask very general questions about you as an individual. So when was a moment in time that you felt most proud of? Who is somebody that you've looked up to in your life and why? So these are less about the university and more giving you an opportunity to tell that story. And these essays should not be school specific. So this is an essay that is typically going to go to every university that you send the application to. So at a very base level, this shouldn't have a specific university's name on it because you might send it to a number of different schools, and so it should be an essay that can be sent to all of them. The second type of essay is a supplemental essay. So supplemental essays may or may not be something that a university requires as a part of their application. Some universities don't have them at all. Some universities have one supplemental essay. Some universities have a series of essays that you can choose from. So it just depends, and it's a good question to ask universities when you are applying or learning more about them. The 2 most common types, again, later on we'll go into some examples, but there is the university specific or the why X university essay, which is really asking, why do you want to attend our school? how do your values align to the school that you are applying to? And then the second type of supplemental essay is more of an intellectual exercise where you are maybe addressing or responding to a prompt that is encouraging you to think critically. So a good example of this is UChicago, University of Chicago will come up with a crazy set of crazy questions each year. Find X, which is a very open-ended question. Where is Waldo really? So those are types of questions that you might encounter with the intellectual exercise. But those are generally the two types that you'll come across. And I'll talk about some examples at a later point. The personal statement, again, this is something that I've already talked about. It's meant to really reveal those core personal qualities to let the admissions committee know how you're going to contribute to their community, their residential community, their dorms, their student organizations, whatever that might be. Like I already kind of jumped ahead and talked about using the first person and I and we. I know that that's something that maybe you haven't used as much of in more academic writing, but in the application process it is very much encouraged because it really helps the student. It will help you kind of elevate and find your voice within the application, being able to talk from that first person. This third bullet is something I want to elaborate a little more on. So there are, when you're thinking of a personal statement, there is personality and then there's plot versus personality. So the plot is what happened in that moment that you're telling us about. So if you're telling us about a football match, for example, if you're using that as an example to share a story about something that you want to share with us, the plot, we don't want the application essay to be just about what happened. Certainly we, as an admissions reader, want to know, okay, what is the story? What is the context? What happened? But then we also want to understand, how did you reflect on that experience? What are your personal reflections? What have you learned from that experience? What have you learned from that story or that interaction? So if it's too much plot driven and less about the reflection and the personal insights and the personal kind of considerations of what happened and what you learned, then it loses a little bit of that personality. So to summarize, if you're talking about a moment, certainly laying out the plot and what happened, but then including a good chunk of the essay, including a little bit of time to really reflect on how you grew from that experience, what you learned from that experience, etc. And then the last point before I jump into a few examples, so consider the topic carefully and be conscious of the audience. So this is not to say that you should write to an admissions committee and write an essay that you feel like is what they want to hear. But at the same time, being conscious that someone who's reading the essay may have specific religious beliefs, may have specific political beliefs. And while I don't want to say to not write about those kind of more kind of sensitive topics like religion and politics, certainly feel like you can talk about those things if they're part of your something you value and you want to share about that, then certainly do so. But just be conscious to write about it in a way that is open-minded. Don't ever tear down any other positions. Be firm in your beliefs and your perspectives and your stance, but also be open-minded to other different perspectives. So just be conscious not to tear down other positions or disparage other positions that may not align with what you personally believe or your own perspective. So that is the last point that I will say, again, because you don't know who's going to be on the other side reading the application. So I realize I've been talking a lot up until this point. I do want to share a few examples, and at the end of these, once we kind of go through them and read them, I'll give some opportunity for you all to really kind of provide any thoughts or feedback on what you thought that this student is starting to do well in their essay. These are, again, excerpts, so these aren't the full essays. I could not fit them all on one slide, but if you just want to go ahead and start reading this, keep some things in mind, such as, is this an effective essay as far as telling that personality? Is the student kind of sharing or revealing parts of their own characteristics or their own story? Thinking about things like that while you're reading this will be a helpful exercise. And then I'll give about 2 minutes or so. And at the end, I'll invite you all to come back and share any thoughts that you have around this essay excerpt from this student. So feel free to take the next minute or so, and we'll come back and discuss in a moment. Okay, so if you're still reading, take your time. I did want to open it up to the group to just sort of, if there's anyone who has any initial thoughts. I believe that this essay is in response to write about someone who you look up to or who has been important to you in your life. So this is, again, the start of an essay. You can almost imagine that you're an advisor receiving this kind of essay from a student who has started writing it and is asking for feedback. So if you were that advisor, what would you say as far as what advice would you give? What feedback would you have for the student?
Well, he or she talks a lot about the grandma. Like, there's nothing there about her or him.
Yeah. So immediately off the bat, I think a couple of things to note here. Again, using the first person, so it's very casual. So it's a good writing style, I will say. It's a good writing style to approach an essay with. But like you said, it's really focusing more on the grandmother, which is, I think, a good observation there.
Yeah, in the chat we have other people. Feel free to unmute yourself, guys. Since when are you shy? So, and they're saying the same thing. Okay, so they're more focused on Grandma Luisa than on the person who's writing the essay.
Yeah, she's definitely an impressive woman. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the students should write about more about the way that the story of her grandma or his grandma impacted her or his life, but not and how this story helped to build her life, but not to write only about the story of her grandma, because her grandma is not applying to the university. It's she who is applying. So I think it's that is more important.
Exactly. That was actually my next question, is if you are the advisor, what would you advise the student to do after you get the essay back? And I think that's a great piece of advice. I think this is a good start to an essay, but I think what it's missing is a little bit of that personal reflection. And going back to that earlier point around plot, personality driven, not plot driven, it can be very easy to get wrapped up in the moment and what the event or the interaction that you're trying to tell. But I think every essay should have that connection to how it has helped you grow, how it has expanded your worldview, how an interaction like this one with Grandma Luisa has, encouraged you or pushed you to become a better person, whether it's in your community or whether it's at your school or whether it's with your family. And so that personal reflection as a way to sort of round out the essay or to really connect back to a specific moment in time that is very personal to you is something that can really make a personal statement exactly that, personal. And only you as a student, if you are very thoughtful about how you share, your reflections and your thoughts, those are thoughts that really are authentic to you as an individual. Whereas the plot, if you're talking about a football match, for example, and scoring a winning goal or the process of scoring a winning goal, that is something that can happen multiple people. Multiple people can have that experience, whereas you alone have, you can share your own thoughts and self-assessment and notes about your own personal growth in a way that other people may not know about you. And so that is a great takeaway for this essay is rounding it out with more of that personal reflection. Any thoughts around the writing style? Again, I noted already that it is a good writing style. I think it sort of debunks this myth that these need to be academic style papers. This student chose sentences that were, they're not these big flowery sentences with a lot of, very sophisticated words. The student is not telling us about, creating a device that is going to change the world. They're just telling us about an interaction and how they look up to their own grandmother. And so I think another big takeaway there is just that, this is a good essay in the making, and it is a good essay in the making because it is starting to tell that story that is authentic to that student. Great. So I'll actually go to essay excerpt number 2. This one's a little longer, so I'll give a little more time. But as you are thinking through this one, feel free to, chime in or put things in the chat. I'll open it up at the end again, but this is just a little bit of a longer one, so I want to give everyone a good bit of time here. Okay, so no worries if you're still reading. I'm going to go ahead and, kind of similar to the essay beforehand, just open it up to you all to talk about, what you liked, what impressed you, what impressions you had, I should say, what you thought the essay did well, or maybe something the student could have maybe improved on. Any thoughts at all? Open to any feedback.
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't finished yet, but I think that it shows a lot about the personality of the student. And yeah, you can see that he or she makes some jokes about the strings and all of that. And yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah. So I think, this student chose to incorporate a little bit of humor, which is, it seems like it's just reading it. It seems like it's the type of humor that the student feels comfortable writing about. Essays don't need to have humor, but this student chose to add that. And I think, if that is the writing style that you feel comfortable with writing in, then certainly feel free to go for it. Again, uses the first person, which I think facilitates that in many ways. And again, it's a pretty mundane topic. It's taking an experience at a bakery and a cafe and tying strings. But that reflection piece, maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself, so maybe I'll kind of open it up to some of, if anyone else had any insights or any thoughts, I'll let anyone else chime in.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Well, I think it's good that the person is showing that he or she is not perfect, even though it's a really simple situation. Like they are showing that they struggle with things and are comfortable with that. Like they are not ashamed of not being perfect, and I think that's really good.
Yeah, that's a great observation, because I think, you know, another common misconception with essays and just applications as a whole is that the students need to have achieved things and need to have succeeded at all of them. Whereas, you know, part of college, part of university is learning through setbacks and failure. You know, you'll be part of research projects where a project may not go in the direction that you're wanting it to. You'll have an exam that, you know, you take, and maybe it's not going to be the best exam that you ever taken. So handling setbacks and feeling free to talk about those times that you've failed, but how you've grown from it. I think that that's a great thing that some students may not feel like they should write about, but that we as an admissions committee, we do value a student who is able to kind of take those experiences and turn them into something, or reflect on it in a way that is positive. So I think that's a great point there. I think certainly this essay is a little more academic in nature. So I think the previous essay still showed a lot of personality, the makings of a good essay. It was a little bit more direct, so that writing style was a little bit different. This one's a little bit more flowery, I would say, but it seems to, you know, fit the student's personality. And so again, going back to the point that there's no one right way to write an essay, but that you as a person writing this essay should feel free to kind of stick with the writing style that makes the most sense for you, as long as you are telling that story and reflecting on how it's been important to you or how it's been impactful. This student at the very end, so this is more of a complete essay than the previous one. So you can recognize that there's a little bit more of the connection back to the earlier parts. So they tell us about the plot, but then they reflect on it in the later parts of the essay. So that reflection, again, really does help bolster an essay and really helps relay that information to the admissions committee around, this is what I've learned, and this is how I will contribute, or how I might contribute to a college community, potentially your college community. So, you know, really, really helpful insights there. And then one last one. Yes, Maura.
Hi, I'm sorry I cut you off when you were going to the next slide. I'm so sorry. But I was just thinking when you were talking about referencing parts of the essay later on, and I was thinking about the first sentence where it says, if string theory is really true, then the entire world is made up of strings and I cannot tie a single one. Would it be appropriate to use that kind of, I don't know, resource in our essays, like saying, okay, here's like a glimpse of what I'm going to be talking about, and I can reference that later on?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's not a requirement, but it definitely, you know, will let the admissions committee member know, like, this is kind of what I plan to talk about. Okay. You know, if that's something you want to incorporate. I think a common misconception is that the first sentence needs to be attention grabbing, you know, because I think some students will start and open with a sentence that is shocking in some ways, like they're trying to get that shock value, and that's not the most effective use of an opening of an essay. I think what your the approach that you're taking around, you know, this is what I plan to talk about. You know, I think that's a better way of kind of setting up the essay. And then you can go into it however you like. But yeah, this student, I think, does that. The previous student doesn't quite do that, but I think the essay, you know, if the student still adds that reflection, we go through these applications. So it's not like we'll just, if the first sentence doesn't catch our attention, we're not just going to not read the essay. We'll still read the essay. But I think setting it up is, I think, a good way to think about it.
Okay, thank you so much. That answers my question perfectly. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So we have one more essay, kind of excerpt example, and I'll give a few more minutes here as well, and then we'll do something similar. We'll come back and just discuss. Okay, I recognize, again, some of you might still be reading, but feel free to, if you do have any initial thoughts in kind of opening and reading kind of the introduction of this essay, or if you just have any feedback whatsoever, feel free to chime in, drop it in the chat. All right, I see someone doesn't seem to talk about personal qualities. It seems more like a YX University essay. That's a good observation. I think we're certainly not getting as much about the student's story here. It's a little bit more plot driven, which it goes back to that earlier point around, trying to have that. There is certainly reflection here, but the reflection is a little bit less personal, and it's a little bit more, why medicine, why being a doctor would be important for my career in the future. And it's less about like how this experience has shaped who I am today and who it will shape me to become while I'm on your college campus, if that makes sense. So Selena and then Facundo.
Okay, hi. I think it's good in the sense that he admires a person and he tries to say why he wants to pursue that career in a university, and also like he wants to save lives and all his purpose. But I don't think it reflects like the personal insight of all of it. So I think it's good, but it's very like why all the academic environment needs to like be that,
Yeah, no, I definitely see that. We can unpack that a little bit more. So yeah, Facundo and then Julia.
It also describes things that are kind of irrelevant to who the student is. Like, for example, describing the type of cancer that the patient had and why they died. They waste a lot of words with this,
Yeah,
which could be used for much better purposes.
that's a great point. Being intentional about words. It's actually the first time that someone's brought that up on this question. And I think when you talk about the extracurriculars list in the essay, you want to be mindful, is this essay, are these words, are these sentences adding to my application? I think that's a lot of word and description that doesn't really address the goal of really sharing with the admissions committee how you're going to be a strong community member. So yeah, no, that's a great point there as well. And then Julia.
Well, I think that this is a great essay, but not for a personal statement. But I think I have seen one about which you have to describe a specific occasion when you really feel that you have to study in a great university and would encourage you to study. I think that this is a great essay for that, but not to describe her personal her personal features. I think that she or he should write more about his or her, but not about the goals. I think that that is for another part of the application.
Right. And just for context, yeah, Iman, I'll answer yours. Oh,
there you go. Yeah, I also wanted to say that the start was like we just talked about, like a shock start. And yeah, it's like great for a story, but when you try to understand who the person is not that great of the start when you just like read about the person in the second paragraph.
Right. Yeah. It really doesn't get to that until it doesn't really. It could be any moment. You know, it could be a hospital drama on TV. You know, up until that second paragraph where the student kind of starts telling us about how it's specific to them, but even still, it's very much, this is what I want to do with my career, which there are a lot of people out there who want to be in the medical profession, who want to be doctors. And so, you know, I would say that in this essay, I think one of the other things that many of you all brought up excellent points, and I think I would just add to it that two things. One is that there is an actual section on the application that asks, what are your future plans? And then there's a section asking, you know, what are your majors that you're interested in studying? So those things already exist elsewhere in the application. So the essay doesn't need to tell us that because it's elsewhere. So, you know, that's something to note is again, how is this essay complementing what you've already said elsewhere? And then the second piece is that we are again looking at the essay to understand outside of the academics and what the student is involved in, you know, in high school and secondary school. How are they going to be a community member? In what ways are they going to contribute to our community during the 4 years that they are here? In the US, medical school and becoming a doctor is all after undergrad. So it doesn't really tell us about how they're going to bring their lessons learned or their personality to our undergraduate campus. They're already telling us, I'm kind of interested in going to your school because I'm more interested in the next things that are coming after that, which is not bad, but it doesn't really help the admissions committee understand. It doesn't really help us as we craft the community of learners that are coming for the 4 years that they're studying here. So that's the other thing I would note is, you know, how is your essay telling us about how you're going to be a community member on a college campus that is in many cases a 24/7 campus with dorms and community organizations and opportunities to engage in the city that is surrounding us. And that's what we're more interested in discovering than your future plans, because that also might change. So hopefully that is helpful. As far as these three essays, I think the first one is actually pulled from one of our essays that worked. It just did not include the second part, which is the more reflective part. So it was kind of, you know, we did that on purpose. The second one was very much one that we pulled from our Essays That Worked page. I forget what year, but you know, this was one that again was really, really nice to see. It was a great example of a story that was told about something that wasn't necessarily a life-changing moment or a lifetime achievement of any kind. It was pretty mundane, but the student was able to build it out a little bit more. And then this third example was actually one that one of our admissions officers created, because believe it or not, we see essays like this all the time. Students that want to study medicine, become a doctor at Johns Hopkins. It's great that that's a future plan, but it doesn't really tell us about the student's story, their background, those things that we're really interested in understanding. Yeah, I see the chat now. Yeah. Major choice rather than personality. Yeah, absolutely. So I realized that we're a little over time, which I hope is okay. I promise there's not much more here. The supplemental essay is one that, again, some of you all already alluded to university-specific essays, the why university essay, and that might be something that universities will ask you to complete. So if a university is asking you to write a why do you want to come to our school essay, the importance here is to be specific, to think beyond just the majors and the location of the school, to think about academic programs and specific festivals and traditions and student organizations and parts of the city that you want to explore. A good exercise that I would recommend is something that I call the whiteout test. So if you take a specific essay, so let's say you wrote an essay about a school that offers a biology program that is by a large body of water, that's also by a large city. If you take the name out of that essay of the university, you'll still have many other universities out there that have biology programs that are by a body of water and by a big city. So if you take out the name, can you still get a sense of what university you are talking about? And if not, then it's just a sign that you should probably do a little more research on why you as an individual want to go to that school, and maybe a little bit more research on the programs that the school offers that are most of interest to you. And then the second type of essay I mentioned at the very beginning, but it's more of the intellectual exercise. I think one thing here to note is that it is less about the answer and it's more about how you arrive at the answer. So, if you're getting a question like why X from a university, X can be a number of different things. X can be a variable in a mathematics equation. X can be a location on a map. And if the university is asking you find X, feel free to be a little creative in how you address that question. Feel free to write about things that are more within your comfort level or within your area of expertise. It's more about how you are answering it, again, and how you're thinking about that topic that is being considered or asked about necessarily than the answer itself. Hopkins doesn't have a specific essay like those that I mentioned, like University of Chicago's or anything like that. But if you do run into a university that has one of these types of supplemental essays, then by all means, feel free to reach out to the admissions officer to ask them, what is the goal of this essay? I have a few ideas in mind, but what is the committee trying to learn about its applicants from an essay like this? Are you thinking more about how the student thinks about the question, how they're approaching the critical thinking element of it? And typically admissions officers will be pretty helpful in helping you navigate or at least get a surface level understanding of why a university is asking the question that it's asking. One last piece I'll mention about the supplemental essay before I kind of open it up to general questions is universities typically ask supplemental questions that are aligned with their values. So by attending information sessions, by researching schools, you might already start to understand the different things that schools value and what they're good at and what they're trying to really convey in their information sessions. And oftentimes the essays are asking about things that the university values. And so if you are enjoying writing the essay, or if there are topics that are drawing you in that you might want to answer, that's typically a good sign that that is the school or one of the schools that you might be interested in going to. And so typically we craft our supplemental essays very intentionally and typically they're asking about things that are very important to us in the admissions process. I recognize that I'm over time. I hope the exercises were helpful in helping you wrap your head around, what is important, debunking some myths and misconceptions around the essays. Hopkins has a number of really great resources. We host workshops like these, not just for the personal statement and telling your story, but then also one specific to our supplemental essay that we're starting to host in the next couple of weeks virtually. We also have our Essays That Worked page, which is, again, a really helpful resource that shares essays, notes from the admissions committee around what made that essay particularly strong. Typically, what you'll find is that these essays are not about, like I've mentioned a few times already, they're not about changing the world. They're not about these big research initiatives and projects and achievements. They're really more about the students sharing their perspectives, their backgrounds, something that is near and dear to their heart. And so that's another great resource that I always encourage students to tune into or check out when they get the chance. At this point, I'll open it up to questions. This can be about the holistic admissions review as a whole, what I talked about at the very beginning. It can be around the essays themselves, anything like that. I am happy to answer any questions at this point.
They are so shy today. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
What's going on? They
no,
they spoke so much the other day. They run out of things to say.
I'm a processor. I like processing information, and I don't always have the questions on the top of my head. So I like to think about things. And certainly if you guys have any questions afterwards, I can drop my email in the chat as well. I see Santiago, you have a question, but I'll drop this. Yes, how can I help?
Okay, I have a question regarding personal statement.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to write about multiple experiences that are connected with a feeling. And I'm not sure if a personal statement or the topic of the personal statement is a good idea to do that, to talk about many experiences and relate them in some way. I don't know if it's a good idea. I would want to ask you your recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge you're going to run into when you're bringing in a lot of different things or many experiences is the length of the essay. So I don't want you to overwhelm yourself by trying to connect a lot of these different pieces to a reflection or a conclusion. If you feel like you can effectively do so by connecting, 1, 2, or 3 moments and tying them or interweaving them with a specific thread, then if you feel comfortable and if you start kind of mapping that out and outlining that essay, and you feel like, okay, I can do this, then feel free to go for it. But what I've typically found is that you oftentimes will start writing, and then one of those moments will actually start building out more than you think. And then you'll get to a point where you're like, mentally, you're prepared to also talk about those other things. And you're like, how do I condense this? And you get into the game of trying to shorten the essay. And so I always encourage students to think, about one moment in time. Well, really, okay, so my advice to students is really starting with the personal qualities. And so when you're looking at your entire application, what are 2 or 3 words that you would use to describe yourself that you feel like you haven't seen anywhere else in the application, or that haven't come through anywhere else in the application? So this could be something like, I want the admissions committee to know that I'm curious about this specific area, or I want this admissions committee to know that I'm determined, or I want this admissions committee to know that I'm open to different perspectives. And then once you have your list of characteristics, pick 1 or 2 of those, and then think about what is a story or a moment in my life where I feel like that personal characteristic came through, or what was one moment in my life where I feel like I developed that personal characteristic. Maybe there was an individual moment. And then start building a list of like, okay, there was that one conversation that I had with my grandfather. There was that one documentary that I watched that one time. There was that one, and then you can start building a list of that. And then once you have kind of those personal characteristics and the stories, that then you can start picking, and this is where I would kind of prioritize just one kind of story to get to that one personal characteristic. I think starting simple is a good way to go. But if you feel like you're building that list and you can say, both of these examples both kind of convey that personal characteristic or quality that I want to reflect on, then you can start kind of playing with it like that. And that'll kind of help you start from a ground zero and start building that idea or concept out in a way that is a little bit less overwhelming than just starting to write an essay about something. Because now that you know that the admissions committee wants to know or wants to glean those specific characteristics, that can certainly be helpful. Going back to the examples, and I realize I'm talking a lot, is the second essay about the string theory. I don't think that the student thought about it this way, but that's a good example of a student who maybe wanted to say, I want the admissions committee to know that I'm curious, and I want the admissions committee to know that I connect ideas. Take those two, and then that student may have thought about a specific moment in time, something very mundane like tying a string, and use that to roll out those two personal characteristics through example. So that's just an example that I would use to kind of build on the points that I mentioned earlier on. But that's a great question, and hopefully that was helpful and informative for others in the audience as well.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Yes, Julia.
I was considering in writing and in a metaphorical way, because I have too many experiences, and I want to join all together and to write how they teach me. Do you think that is a great option to write in a metaphorical way, or I should write with only not? I don't think that is the truth, but it's only in a way that you only talking about the events but not talking about metaphorically.
Yeah, I would say you do want to incorporate some element of a moment that is personal to you, like an actual moment, an actual plot. But if you choose to connect those, it seemed to me like you have one or two areas kind of similar to oh my god, looking for you on the screen, I already forgot. So kind of similar to the previous question around the two concepts. If you want to use the metaphor or the extended metaphor to connect those concepts, so a good example of this, and this might be helpful in how you're thinking about it. So there was one student who talked about their love of baking, and started the essay talking about baking. And there was one cake. There's a specific kind of cake that has like multiple layers to it, and each of the layers has its own flavor and has its own ingredients. And so they actually used that as a metaphor while talking about their love of baking. Use that as a metaphor to connect to the fact that she comes from a very unique background where her father was of a specific religion, of a specific nationality. Her mom also a very different religion, very different nationality. Both sides of the family had different, because she was who she was because of the different layers of the people who had been in her life, that multicultural background. And so she almost used that love of baking to tell the story about putting ingredients together, and each layer has different ingredients, and uniquely they are very delicious, but when put together they can be made even more delicious with this pastry that she liked baking. And she connected it back to, this was my this is how I feel with my personal life, because kind of these are my two parents came from these different areas and they met, and I've learned so much from them, and I feel like I am who I am because of the interweaving of these perspectives. So I didn't quite do the essay justice, but I think that's a great example of an extended metaphor that can be used to connect the first part of the essay, I guess, which is the plot, the thing that you're trying to sort of convey, and then the second part, which is more of that reflection. So hopefully that was along the lines of what you were thinking about. If not, at least an example of how a metaphor is still something that you are more than welcome to use if it is something or a vehicle that you can use to connect concepts in your essay together. So hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I do realize I'm over time, but I am certainly happy to hang around and answer any other questions that you all have. And I also dropped, again, my email in the chat. So feel free, again, to also email me as you have questions in the next couple of months, weeks. Yes, Selena.
Hi, yeah. So there's a couple of questions in the chat in case you didn't notice.
Yep, I see them now. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the whiteout method is, so the whiteout method is if you are answering a question around why university. So why X university? So when you're writing that essay, you're typically going to explain to the university why you want to go to their school. So what are areas that excite you the most about that university? And once you write that essay, or as you're starting to write that essay, take a little moment to step back and delete the name of the university or just blank it out and read the essay without the name of the university. And if you feel like that essay can apply to various different universities, then that essay is not as effective as if you are reading the essay and you immediately say, okay, that is a very specific example of a research facility or a student organization or a tradition that is unique to that school, even not knowing what school they're talking about, I know exactly which school it is. So if you take the university name out of the essay, you should still be able to, based on the depth of the detail of the programs that are being described. That's just a kind of fancy way of saying, do your research and write about things that are very specific about the school that you want to be a part of and that you want to do when you're a student there. So that was hopefully a little bit more context there. The next question is it possible to change personal statement essay from early decision to regular decision? So maybe you can write something specific for the only university I'm applying. So no, so you cannot write a separate essay for a school just for early decision. Unfortunately, that's a great question. I actually hadn't gotten that question before. For universities with supplemental essays, you kind of already don't have to worry about that because you will have a supplemental essay where you're able to write that why I want to go to your school in some way, shape, or form. You're at least able to demonstrate that next level of desire or demonstrated interest in the school. For schools that do not have supplemental essays, you cannot write a specific essay to them, or at least I wouldn't advise it, because the common application, once you create your personal statement, I believe that's the one that has to go to other schools. And now that I'm thinking about it, there might, I don't know.
I'm not sure either. Like last year, one of our opportunity students did change the essay. I mean, they could change the essay, but in the end, I don't know what university's called.
No,
that's a good
deadline
question,
later,
actually,
and
right? Yeah.
I think you probably, there might be a way that you can. But if you do that, let's say you apply early decision to a school, that university, that essay specifically says that school, I would just be very careful to make sure you change that. If you don't get into that early decision school, and if you apply ED2 or regular decision somewhere else, just make sure that essay has been changed, which I'm sure many of you all would do and you'd be on top of that. But what you don't want to do is send an essay to another school that's like, this is why I want to go to the school that you applied to early decision. It's not a deal breaker. It's not going to be the end of the process. Admissions committee members are not as harsh on those kinds of things. They understand things are crazy, but you want to try to avoid it if possible. So there might actually be a way, and I would work with folks in the advising center to kind of see what might be the best way to do that. So yeah. Great.
Okay, so well,
great questions.
This
though.
is,
I appreciated the engagement and the questions, and certainly again, if you all think of any other questions, if things just didn't come to mind, I'm always happy to help.
Thank you, Ben, for always, stopping by in our sessions and sharing so, generously all this knowledge you have gathered on writing essays. You have a lot of experience, and it's great for them to listen it from you, right? Because we might say certain things, but if they listen it from you, it's a different thing. So so thank you very much, Ben, for being here with us today. And well, if they have more questions, you can ask us or you can reach out to Ben. There's lots of, Johns Hopkins has lots of resources. We've you know, ever since we heard that you had the essays that worked in Johns Hopkins, we started creating our essays that work for Argentine students, you know. So we're gathering that and we share those with them as well. So do go and explore the resources they have, because Johns Hopkins has lots of great resources for students. We really appreciate that as advisors. So thanks again, Ben. Thanks, guys. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks. All right. And we'll see you in person, some of you. Okay. Bye-bye, Ben. Thank you.
Ben.
Bye.
Bye.